Guys, I am super stoked about the tutorial I've got lined up for you. I had the opportunity to work with a consultant named Giuseppe out of Italy. It turns out he was working on this data orchestration problem where he was trying to manipulate Domo using APIs, which is a promise that Domo says is possible, but you can never find any documentation really about how the nuts and bolts of actually getting it done. So this video actually has two tutorials wrapped up into one video, so do check the description. First, we're going to cover how to execute a data set using PyDomo, and then second, we're going to show you how to execute a data flow using post request.
Hey guys, my name's Jay Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company, Onyx Reporting, and I'm super excited to welcome Giuseppe to the show. What are you going to
I,
show us today?
I've been starting working as a data engineer from 2017, and it's almost 1 year that I've been working with Domo. And yeah, from that moment on, Domo became my daily bread. As long as the data I'm dealing with are increasing, another thing that actually increases the number of flows we create to manage all this data. And it's becoming more and more complex. And in order to better manage all your flows, it's essential, I think, to be able somehow to control Domo even outside of its incredible web interface. Here we are just giving, the starting point for any of you to understand how to run them. Then yes, you're free to go with your fantasy and with your abilities as a developer, and actually yes, create an orchestrator as strong as you want.
Right. Okay. One of the challenges I had with a client is, or all clients, is naming conventions. And they come up with these like really complicated naming conventions. I want it to be prefixed with the source system. I want it to be post-fixed with XYZ. And what ends up happening is, of course, nobody follows the naming conventions. But I had one customer who was using Domo and Python, and they were like, we're going to build an automated script. If your data flow does not pass the naming conventions test, it gets deleted. We'll give you 3 days notice, but it will automatically get deleted. Don't blame us. Follow the naming conventions.
Oh
And
well,
like, stuff like that really helps you working with data flows at scale. Or another client, they had private information. So they had like customers' first names, last names, GPDR, big concern, blah, blah, blah. And one of the challenges with Domo is as you transform data, if I have an input data set that has private information and an output and another input data set that's not private, if I output the data set, Domo has no idea that this other data set features private information. So you could build a pipeline, like some sort of a recursive query that says, if any of my data sets have personal information, then tag it with a certain name. And or test if PDP has been enabled, and if it hasn't been enabled, automatically enable it. This kind of automation, I love that language of orchestration.
when we actually generate our credentials, so the client ID and the client secret, we have to, of course, put them somehow in our script. In this case, I'm just using a configuration file.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, we will have the client ID and all the credentials we need to authenticate to the API.
Okay, so you went to developer.domo.com and you're generating a new client ID and secret, client ID and secret. Is that under my account? It is under my account, isn't it?
Yes, you go to my account and new clients then.
Okay. And again, this is specifically for working with PyDomo.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what you need to have to connect to public API, so also to PyDomo. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the first things I actually need to do is then import these credentials. Yeah, next step, we can already connect to Domo using the PyDomo library. And we actually are importing the Domo class. That is the one that is actually giving us a Domo instance object. What we need, another thing we actually need is the API host. This is, of course, api.com, domo.com. And now what we can do is just pass to the Domo constructor our credentials and the API host. And this Domo object is actually going to give us access to datasets, streams, and also other things we are not covering today. Let's try to run a connector from this script. I already created a general one. This is just an example. The connector has an append update method.
Nice.
And it's now just appending rows. So what we expect to have is at the very end of the script to have a new row in this dataset that is coming from the run we're going to execute from the script. Well, the first thing we need to do is to get the stream ID. This is actually not very trivial, but we can easily understand it just by thinking that every flow in Domo has an associated stream ID.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, a connector is a flow, taking data from the external, but it's a flow, basically.
And actually pause for a moment for those of you who are like trying to keep up here. So the stream ID is going to be different from the GUID or the dataset ID. So can you highlight the dataset ID for me? That that is not the stream ID. That's the dataset ID. Those are two separate things. Okay, cool.
So we have the dataset ID. And now what we need to do is to get the ID of the stream associated to this dataset.
Mm-hmm.
So we have two options. Either we use the Java CLI, but we want to run this programmatically, so we don't want to do anything. What we can actually do is to access the list of the streams in our Domo instance, and then catching the one with associated this dataset ID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and sorry, just maybe a language barrier thing. So you mentioned the Domo CLI, the Domo CLI. That's our Java CLI that we talk about in the Domo Dojo, right? We could run the list. You just said it, wasn't it? List data set with past the -i flag, and that would give us information about that one data set. But because we're building this orchestrator that we want to run programmatically, we're going to try to avoid the Java CLI for now, and that's what you're about to. I'm stoked, man. I've been dreaming about this for months, and I'm like, I should do this eventually. But you've done it for me. I love it.
Thank you, Jeff. What we're going to do then is getting the streams object. You know, I already told you that with Domo, with the Domo instance, we can access basically everything in Domo. And just by using domo.streams, we are actually accessing the streams of our instance.
Yeah. Can you print that? Can you show me what the streams object returns?
Yeah.
Because I literally don't know.
This is not going to be very readable because it's just a stream client object.
Okay. Okay.
But then, if we actually get the stream list object, then if I print this, what you are going to see is
look at that.
All the streams in our instance.
Right. Can you copy paste that into like VS Code and give me a pretty print?
Maybe.
Oh, nice. Oh, you're so fancy.
Let's see. Yeah.
That's what I want. Okay. Okay. So let's. Okay. So ID1, that's one object.
Yeah. As you can see here, you have the ID of the stream, the creation date, the dataset ID. And then information about last execution,
right,
last successful execution, update method.
So what are we learning from ID 11? Is that telling me that this connector or this data set never ran?
Yeah, you're right.
Oh, you just have data sets hanging out in your instance that you don't run?
Yeah, but this is just a sandbox, so we are putting all the cache.
Interesting little Domo governance. I love
Yeah,
that though. That's so cool. I learned two things already: pretty print and this
yeah,
demo.streams. Awesome.
yeah.
Okay. And so 2000, is that 2000 telling me limit me to 2000 results and give me the first page of the 2000 results?
Yes, exactly.
I love this.
Okay, so what we actually need to do is then look into this list of streams for our stream, the one with associated dataset ID, the dataset ID that we copied from the UI.
Okay, so you're iterating over stream list.
Yep.
And you're saying if the
The
stream dataset ID is equal to the dataset ID that I'm looking for, then return that result to the thing called the dataset streams.
yes, this is actually a list
Yeah.
of sets, but if we are doing everything right, there should be just one stream associated to our ID. So we can just take the first result of this list.
Oh my God, list comprehension in Python looks so different than in JavaScript. Oh, I love it. Okay, cool.
Okay, so I'm going to print the dataset stream. Let me do this. So yeah, as you can see, we found one, and this is actually the 12th ID dataset, the stream. Well, this should not be surprising, but the dataset ID is exactly the one that we copied from the browser before.
Right.
Okay, so now we have the dataset stream ID.
Yeah.
It's a property of this object. So yeah, I'm taking just the ID from this JSON file, basically. And once we have this, we have a powerful instruction in our PyDomo library that is the create executions. So what this instruction is doing, let me paste it, is getting the list, the streams client object, the one that we saw at the beginning, and create a new execution for the ID. So let's
So again, guys, this should trigger the execution of the data set in Domo. And the whole reason we're going through all of this shenanigans is we cannot trigger dataset execution using the dataset ID. We had to go through this streams object to find the stream ID, and then we can trigger execution using a stream ID.
exactly.
All right, let's go. I love it.
Yeah. Ooh, here it is.
And there it is, 6:47 p.m. It's late for both of us.
There are so many cases in which this can be very useful. I think also if you, for instance, are going to load some data from an external database, just think at your database, you're going to load the data into Domo. You're doing it daily, but you don't actually know when the data are ready to be loaded. Well, if somehow you may create a script running that connector exactly in the time in which the data are ready, yeah, you are saving a lot of time, and yeah, performance will improve. This is something extremely cool. Yeah.
Does it tell you the execution state? Oh, current state is success.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can also.
So another use case we had based off of this, I had a client that had they were trying to create almost a streaming data pipeline, just load data into Domo as quickly as possible. And we said, okay, we can't do streaming, but we can do batch execution. So basically what we said is every I don't know, 30 seconds or every 5 minutes, we need to ping the stream and ask it, what is your current state? Is it success or is it executing? And as soon as it's success, that means it's done, we can push the next batch of data. And so we just built this loop that worked, 24 hours a day, just ping the API, what's the status, and then push the next batch of data through.
Other use cases may be interesting. It may be interesting actually to run also a data flow in such a way that can be a magic.ql or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So also in this case, we need the ID of the data flow, but this time is quite easier because we just need the ID of the data flow. We don't need to check for the stream associated or anything. So what we need to do now is to get a session token in order then to call the API that will trigger the execution of the data flow. So the way we can get a session token is actually with a request to this authentication API.
Can you print auth_API for me, just for people who haven't seen this .format method before? So what we're doing here is we're passing in a variable Domo_instance into this string. It's a template string, but yeah, just in case people haven't seen this before. Yeah. So basically, we're querying that instance of Domo. And guys, for those of you who are finding code samples on the internet, there's like two, let's say, different authentication methods for two different sets of APIs. Any API that starts with api.domo.com / blah blah blah, functionally any API that you find under developer.domo.com will use your token and client token and secret. So if you can you pop back to the other script we were just looking at?
Yeah.
So here, notice that when he's connecting to Domo, he's passing in client ID and client secret. Can you highlight line 8 for me, please? Yeah, so that's the authentication method for any of these APIs that you find under developer.domo.com. Now, when it gets time to query some of the other APIs, any API that does not start with api.domo.com, and notice here we're going to simona-dev.domo.com, those APIs, we're going to use a different authentication method.
What we need now, so is basically to give in the body of this request the email and the password. So they're like the parallel for the client ID and secret.
Mm-hmm.
For pushing the headers for this request. So it's just content type application/JSON. And here we're saying we're authenticating with a password. This is my email address, and this is my password.
Okay. And obviously we can't ask you to print that for us because that's actually your email and password. Guys, if you think about how you authenticate when you use Workbench, it's very similar. Workbench will take you to, I'm not positive if it's that URL, but it takes you to a UI where it asks you what's your username and password, and then it gives a session token back to Workbench, which is how Workbench can do the stuff that it does. I think that's true. I'm 90% that's true.
We are just using the request library. And yeah, as you can see, I'm just telling him, you make a post request to this URL. This is the data, and this is the headers. So this is going to be the response for our request. And if everything goes right, we are going to have the session token inside of the answer to our request. So yes, this is the JSON generated by our request, and it will have a session token property that we can extract. And yeah, this is the token we need to actually authenticate to the other APIs.
Mm-hmm. Again, guys, for those of you who aren't as familiar with Python, if you've used Postman before and maybe sent a Postman request, we're doing the same thing. If you heard the language of send a curl request, or if you've ever sent a request in JavaScript, these are all basically the same thing. We're saying, this is the URL that I want to send my post to. This is the stuff, the body, that's what I'm sending. And then these are the headers that I need to have in order for the API to know what to do with the thing. So we're telling our API, hey, expect the body to contain JSON formatted stuff. Then the API says, oh, hey, here's my response. That's your auth_response. We're going to parse it into JSON. And then once we parse it into JSON, we're extracting the property called session token. Are all of those words more or less correct?
Yeah, it's perfectly how you said.
Yes, I'm like self-taught Python expert.
Guys, Python is super fun. Just give it a try. Now that we have this, we need to create the execution for the data flow. And the way we are going to do is just another post request to this new API. As you can see here, the mechanism is the same as before. So we're going to our instance, and then as you can see here, we are going to push the ID of the data flow we want to run. So yeah, the syntax is the same as before. I'm formatting the string using the format function, telling him, okay, so this is the Domo instance, and this is the data flow ID. Yeah.
And so there's no body involved. All we're doing was we're saying, hey, Dataflow #1 post, and please do an execute. And we're passing in our credentials, which allows Domo to know, hey, this is a valid, or I'm sorry, we're not passing our credentials. We're passing a session token, which represents our credentials. But this is how Domo knows, hey, this is a valid user who has permission to execute this data flow, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you trigger that and we run over to Domo, can we see it executing?
I think we should. I hope we do. So let me, yeah, I'm updating the page. I'm refreshing it. And yeah, it's running.
It's running. Ah!
So
That's
yeah,
super cool. Guys, I like, this seems trivial. You're like, why don't you just do it in the UI? One of my clients, we had this problem where we had a data flow that was consuming 5 or 6 really large data sets that were updated by different ETLs. What you could do is you could say, oh, well, what if I set it to update when the data sets are updated? Imagine I have 5 input data sets. As soon as the first one updates, my data flow gets triggered to execute. But the other 4 data sets haven't updated yet. And I loved that language you used earlier of building an orchestrator. The orchestration is, I need to check the streams, which we just learned how to do, of the other 5 input data sets. Is the status set to success, or is it still updating? Don't trigger execution of my data flow until I get 5 successes, because if I only have 1 success and the rest are still updating, I don't want to run my data flow yet. And so like this intersection of using PyDomo and triggering this data flow to run, oh my gosh, this is such high value for customers that are dealing with really complex workflows. I mean, I'm super excited for the next video. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your day. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. It was a super pleasure.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you got some good value out of this, and we'll catch you at the next one. Bye.
If you are interested in more content like this, guys, please like the video, share it on LinkedIn, subscribe to the channel. But also, just so you know, in April, I'm working with the user group to put together a conference where we'll get presenters like Giuseppe and some of the other people that you've seen on the channel to present some of these like hands-on tutorials and best practices about how to actually get stuff done in Domo. So we're really looking to get some momentum and gain your support for this, hopefully what will be very valuable endeavor. So cool. I hope you guys liked the video. I'll catch you later.